Our discussions continue.
Sorry.
What did I miss?
Nothing.
Okay. Our discussions continue. We have what we have deemed the next generation, people who have been doing this for 19 years or less in some shape or form. As we also know in dance, like, time is murky. What I appreciate with this opportunity, when I first got here in 2016, some people were still talking about Ohio Ballet, and you would have thought it had closed like yesterday. And that's why it's important to sort of like fact check ourselves when I talk about like how much is our history propping us up and how much is it like holding us back if we're living in the idea of whether it's the rubber worker or the salad days of dance touring. And so this opportunity to revisit, arbitrarily divide ourselves by time, but to continue to hear and listen from each other, both affirming what we know about working in this field and challenging what we think we know. So you may come away today with new ideas. We're going to do introductions. The form of introduction is a similar prompt to our first panel, where I have asked each of our dance makers up here to list an artistic highlight by way of introduction. This could be looking backwards if there's a particular moment that you want to make sure everyone knows about, or it could be a completely not shameless plug about something you're working on right now. Because as we know, it's always going. To get ourselves started, I wonder if we might start with TMP. So Megan and Elise, an artistic highlight, please.
Yes, I'll go ahead. Are we allowed to have individual?
Well, I'm going to cut you off in 3 minutes between the two of you.
Okay, so looking back, I'd say is the one that I would bring to the table. And that was early 2019 when we brought Pam Tanowitz to Cleveland. And we did a evening length installation work at our old space at Pilgrim Church in Tremont. And we collaborated with the members of her company. We hired dancers from the community outside of TMP and of course TMP company. And Pam came in and set this 55-minute length work on all of us. And it was a really pivotal moment, I think, because Pam was just starting to have her moment at the time. And so there was a lot of momentum coming in, but at the same time, she had just approached us because she was looking for a space to rehearse because she had, her partner lived in, or was from the Cleveland area, so she was visiting. And she was just like, oh, hey, they have a space. And we're like, yes, we do. Also, we do this. And so all these things just kind of fell into place, so it was just a lovely experience.
Awesome.
Okay, we can go with that one.
Okay. I love collaboration in the work. I know. Aaron Weaver from Mojuba Dance Collective, artistic highlight by way of introduction.
Yeah, so a lot of my work over the years, especially starting out, has been rooted in the church and dance of sacred and gospel tradition. And we envisioned doing an evening concert where we combine professional dancers with community dancers and people who probably have never been on the stage before in their lives. And it's called How I Got Over. And we did it for several years, had wonderful audience participation, and people were super excited about it. But it was during the process, the artistic process, that we realized, and I realized specifically, like, the real transformative connection of what dance is. It was confirmed for me through that process. We were looking back at our history as a Black community and American history, and realizing that a lot of that which we dealt with then, we're still dealing with now, and that those traumas still run deep. And so we're using the dance as a catalyst to help deal with the things that we didn't even realize were there. So a lot of the process was breaking down in the middle of rehearsal and finding ways to build ourselves back up and to put together this production. Throughout the process also, we had these different groupings. So we had those who have never danced, who really need a whole lot of special attention. And then those who probably had some experience, maybe they went to Cleveland School of the Arts, maybe they just graduated the university and have some real dance training. And so we were grouping people off that way in order to create this production. Mojuba was one of the groups that we decided was a good name for those who were a little bit more technically advanced, if you will. And so through that process, Mojo was kind of born through that How I Got Over process. And what I also remember during the process is that it would be wonderful to have more representation of our narratives. When I say our, the Black community, our narratives and our stories and our bodies on stage. And so there was a shift from more ministry work to expand the art that I was doing to involve the narratives of the Black community. So I think that was a moment for sure with How I Got Over, where we heard the reactions from the audiences and heard and saw the impact from the dancers and those who participated and said, okay, we have something here, and I think we need to keep it going.
Yes. I know you can see we have many more people to hear from, but I should have also offered, I really appreciate, I think the majority that we were able to find and cite locations are on our timeline. I'm hoping that folks will help us add to our timeline at the end of today as well. So if you are discovering, being introduced to any new to you artists in this process, hopefully this will not be the last time that you see them and their work. And I also, just from our time together today, want to plant, because we talked a little bit about a renaissance of moment, especially in the 80s for dance in Northeast Ohio. Doing the preparation for this work and seeing like how many next generation artists who have chosen to make Northeast Ohio their home and start this work in just the last, really there's a like influx in the last 10 to 15 years, some a little longer, some a little bit shorter. That we might be on the verge of another renaissance, y'all.
Yeah.
So yes.
Sorry, shameless plug, I forgot that part. And you saying Renaissance brought this up, and so thank you. We are also a part of the Transformative Arts Fund, so we were one of the 7 artist groups that were selected for the Transformative Arts Fund. So we'll be seeing a lot of work from Mojo Dance Collective specifically regarding Black maternal and fetal health and how we are going to address that with the arts and create a holistic healing model that involves continuing the work that we did with How I Got Over, that involves community and both professional artists together. And then also we have a concert that we are doing at Karamu House that will display some of this work firsthand. August 17th, I have flyers and tickets if anybody's interested.
Yes, and Caramel House is actually the first date on our timeline, having been established in 1915.
Wow.
So, perspective.
Yes.
I'm gonna switch it up on y'all. Alice Blumenfeld here, opera paso to my left, a significant artistic highlight.
Okay, so there's a couple of moments that are sort of all connected that I really, when I was thinking about this prompt. So our first show was in 2016 in Albuquerque, New Mexico, which is where I'm from. It was the first full-length show that I would say I choreographed from scratch as opposed to copy and paste steps within the traditional canon of flamenco. And one of the solos I created was a style called soleá, which is musically probably the most complicated style in flamenco, and I would say emotionally requires the most depth. And I basically worked through a traumatic event that I'd gone through in choreographing that solo, and I just remember after I finished it, being backstage, just this total release and catharsis. So I was proud of that performance, but then afterwards I thought, how can I offer this to other people? A taste of this. They don't have to study flamenco for 10 years, but can they get some of this catharsis and community that's so inherent in flamenco through a similar process? So I developed an interdisciplinary arts therapy workshops that I still do and I've done in different residencies called the Soleá Project. And I've continued integrating new ideas to it. Quilting is something that runs in my family, so there's a quilting element when I'm able to do longer residencies. So that sort of shows a little bit how there's traditional flamenco, there's more innovative choreography, and then there's always this connection to the community. And along those same lines, in 2020 with the pandemic, I was like, what am I gonna do with all this time? And I have to keep moving forward. The name of the company means abre paso, to open a new pathway, and sort of charge ahead on that pathway. So I had this crazy idea at the time, I thought, to start an apprenticeship program in the fall of 2020. And I had 4 dancers sign up, and we spent 9 months, they had a 9-month studying with me intensively. And then about a year ago, one of the women who had studied with me performed a Soleá as a solo. And when she got off stage, she started crying. And it was just so special to witness someone else experiencing that catharsis and that I can pass forward flamenco in that way. And then taking that a step further, someone in the audience after that show said, when I saw Christina dance, I just felt something inside of me. And like, to me, that's really what it's all about. And I want to say one other short little story too. This whole idea of abriendo paso, sort of making a new pathway. I was working in arts ed in East Cleveland, and as I'm sure many of you know, it was an environment not conducive to learning. And I was really challenged to find a way to connect with students, so I let go of my sort of traditional flamenco and method of doing arts ed and found a Tupac poem, The Rose That Grows Through Concrete. And me and the kids created this dance together, and when we finished the dress rehearsal, the assistant principal was there, and she just sat there stunned. And it was one of these transformative moments where I think the kids really understood what that poem meant because they had actually embodied it. And so even though it wasn't a flamenco verse, to me, like the way that we embody words is so much of what flamenco is. So I could draw from my experience in that and offer that to the kids. So that's kind of, hopefully that gives you an idea what Abre Paso is about.
It also just reminds so much, I will quote Linda Martell on Beyonce's Cowboy Carter record, genres are a funny little concept, aren't they? And this idea, we were talking about dance audiences earlier. I think one of the big challenges is that come to my dance show can mean so many different things. And that is one of the best things about it, I think, for those of us who have drank the Kool-Aid, and maybe one of the most challenging things about it for someone who just feels that much far removed from their bodies. And so yes, we're hearing some common themes. Catherine Meredith, how would you like to introduce yourself today by way of artistic highlight?
Catherine Meredith, and I feel like I wear many hats on any given day, but I had my second performing career, moving to Northeast Ohio after guesting with for the Appalachian Spring creation, and later joined the company back in 2005. Like Diana McIntyre, I started choreographing when I was like 7 or 8 years old. But really had the space to do it because anyone who's lived in New York City knows how expensive space is. So had the space to really concentrate on it more in Cleveland. I guess I've now been in Cleveland as long as I lived in New York. So after my dancing career has subsided a bit, I went back to school and got my MFA through Holland's American Dance Festival, and I'm now pursuing my doctorate. Just have to write it now. But I teach at Kent State University, and I've been a freelance choreographer for a really long time. As a dancer, I'll say my highlights were I've worked with so many great choreographers, and I feel very blessed. The Appalachian Spring was pivotal in my career, and getting to do my favorite choreographer, Ulysses Stubb. So doing Vespers was a huge highlight for me. As a choreographer, I choreographed a piece called Aftermath. As a guest artist, I was brought into Kent State University in 2018, and I created that work based off of where I was at in my life, and finally being able to, the Me Too movement was happening. Women were finally being believed. We were allowed to tell our stories. And so I think for me in that moment, I felt brave enough to investigate it. And so that was storytelling, allowing the students, the women, the 9 women, to write about times in their life where they may have felt invisible or marginalized or silenced. And through those stories, we generated movement. And so I think that the catharsis that we went through, to borrow that word, And then seeing it at the Kennedy Center, having it made there, be accepted from the American College Dance Association to get all the way there. And then just seeing how it went to the Women in Dance Conference in Philadelphia and all the many lives it's had since then, and how many women have felt seen and heard through the process, because we created each time. That I think has been a highlight for me.
I remember that work. I think I saw it at the showcase at Playhouse Square. Yeah. Thank you. Talisa from
Yes.
Japo, please introduce yourself by artistic highlight.
Yes, once again, my name is Talise. So happy to be here. There's so many highlights, but I'm gonna try to extract two. One earlier one and one most recent. I grew up here in the city of Cleveland, and I was just so happy to have two individuals. I have to say their names because in my culture, you really can't move forward until you recognize all those whose shoulders you stand on. So I just want to acknowledge first Baba David Coleman, Ibaye, and Linda Thomas Jones. Those were two people who actually were responsible for my entrance into culture at 9, 10 years old. So I give thanks to them first. One of my earlier highlights is me being able to take 18 individuals, ages 12 through 35, through 60, to West Africa to have a cultural arts immersion, and being able to perform one of my original works in front of people who were of that culture. How scary is that, right? For you to actually do the research in Africa, bring it back to the States, set that piece of work inclusive of looking at caste systems, looking at ethnicity, just various things when it comes to research, and being able to set that work on a company and then bring it back across the water, and let people that are of that culture to view it and to respect it and to absolutely love it was a wonderful highlight for me. I talk about it all the time. I see pictures of it all the time, and it's really wonderful. And I take those trips every year, but that one in particular was really wonderful. A most recent highlight, which also stems from the cultural immersion trips and my own research in Mali, West Africa, being able to be alongside music and really take a deep dive into the music in Mali. Oh my goodness, the music there is just so wonderful. And if you don't take that deep dive into the music, it will never show up on the dance side. So it was really, maybe the past 8 years, I've really been able to take that deep dive onto the musical side of things within my choreography. So being in Mali, going to a sanja, which is an event for jellies, and it's so much history that's involved in that, and really looking at the research of each aspect of it. How do you come dressed? How do you interact with people? What is the language of the people? And being able to speak that language to your dancers here on American soil and get them to have the content, the emotional content that's the exact same, or very similar. I'm looking for it being exactly the same. That emotional content that's exhibited while on African soil. So just recently, we had our 15th annual concert. We had it at Cleveland Public Theater, and that work was presented. We actually recreated a sanja, an event on stage. Of course, it was theatrical, but we had all of the elements to a sanja, both musically, artistically, and also inclusive of the aesthetic, the dress, how people even dress, and language. So that was a huge highlight for me, and not only being able to put it on stage, but for the individuals who are participating in that, for them to get education as to what's happening in Africa. What did I miss? For us being able to go back And the hopes and the goals is to preserve this culture, is to preserve all of the rites of passage, all of the events that do occur on a daily basis. So those are the things that are a highlight for me to be able to see the audience being impacted, and for the dancers alike to walk away like, wow, I really did something powerful. So that's Talise.
Thank you for sharing, Denise. Melissa, right next to you, please introduce yourself by artistic highlight.
Hi, Melissa Ajayi Dance, and artistic highlight. I guess I began as a freelance dancer, choreographer, artist, and was doing that for a while, and then my regular money-making job was as a recreation therapist. And during the pandemic, that became super overwhelming, and I ended up leaving that job to stay home with my 2 young children. And at that time, also had this whole network of freelance dancers in the area who all of us were so like displaced. We had nowhere to be, nowhere to do what we loved. And I had been taking my kids to this area that was just so beautiful. And I thought, oh my gosh, we could dance here. I am there all the time. I'm just like, all I can see here is people dancing. It's so beautiful. And so that began the inspiration for what became a 3-part site-specific series of, we called it Place and Time. And yeah, that one little project where I called all my friends and said, hey, do you guys want to dance outside? And then we organized it so that the patrons could come safely and hike a trail without being too close to anyone, but still had this connection of, as they hiked the trail, they saw what was happening and knew that it happened before and after they left as other people came through. And it just felt like this really wonderful moment of connection with the community that we hadn't had for so long. And then when we did it, for some reason I decided it was a series. I don't know why. I was like, yeah, we're gonna do this thing, but it's not just gonna be once. We're gonna do it again and again. I think that might have been my weird overachieving way of being like, okay, we're gonna transition to something else now, and made myself do more. And we completed the series in October of 2023 with the 3rd site-specific Place and Time Where How, and that was presented at the Ingenuity Building in downtown Cleveland. And yeah, I think completing that series was the highlight, and I have not gone back to that other job. So, not that I've made any money.
Yes, we'll get to the money part. Christina, please introduce yourself by artistic highlight.
Okay. I have to preface this by saying the first panel was lovely, and I'm feeling very emotional and squishy. So I'm pivoting, I'm going off the cuff, but I came to Cleveland 11 years ago now. I danced for 8 seasons, I think, with Ohio Contemporary Ballet. It was then Verb. And I choreographed a few times, like within the company, like for shows that we were doing. But in 2020, I stopped dancing with the company, started freelancing, doing my own thing. And I was kind of going through that like isolation and divorce of like, okay, who am I if not dancer? You know, like what do I want to do? What do I want to say? I still want to dance. So I had gotten all this funding together for like my first piece that was going to be just me, you know, no company to kind of cover me and lessen the blow if I failed. And that was in 2020, and we all know what happened in 2020. So we had to make a pretty big pivot. All of a sudden it was a dance for film, and I had never done that before, and no one had ever done anything before. We were all figuring it out and crying. And we were! And, yeah! And, you know, I realized kind of through that process how vast and wide the artistic community is here. Like, in listening to the first panel and now sitting up here with all of these people and like looking at the dancers in the room and all the awesome people that support us, it's like, you're never actually alone. Everybody's got your back. If they believe in what you're doing, they're coming out of the woodwork and they're gonna help you. And I thought that was amazing. So we got that piece off the ground, thank God. And I think also just because of I'm sorry, I told you I'm feeling squishy, you can hear the shakes. But I think because of that, as I was going through finding myself outside of a dance company as well, I was able to take the focus off of myself and really just see the joy through my artistic collaborators, my dancers, and feeling like we made something that like mattered at that moment. Also just with the subject matter of that piece, and because it ended up being a dance for film, it was broadcast far and wide. We ended up winning a couple awards all as far away as in Calcutta, India. So that was very cool. And some of the feedback that I got, of course via email, because we couldn't like hang out, was like people were really deeply touched. They'd even changed how they voted because of that piece. And that was not my intention. I was not doing anything like that, but it just really made me feel good about what I had done. So to take the focus off of myself and onto the art that I really loved helped me to really find myself, and we haven't looked back. We're still making dances. So that's my story.
Dominic, would you please introduce yourself by artistic highlight?
Yeah, so also in 2020. So me and my wife were pregnant with our first child, Maverick, and George Floyd had just been murdered, and we were all stuck in a house. Me and my wife lived in Kenmore, which is South Akron, this tiny little ranch home. We're just having a lot of conversations, and in that conversation, I realized for the first time I was gonna have to tell my black son about police. I hadn't considered that yet in my life, because I was usually like protecting myself in that situation. So that started me on this curiosity and this question of like, how do other people do this in their lives? So I started talking to a lot of other black people in my networks, parents, saying, well, what do you tell your children? What do you tell your children? And the general consensus was you just teach them how to get home. And like I heard that, but I was like, but there also has to be something else. It can't just be fear. So I decided to start trying to figure out how to talk to police officers, specifically black police officers, about their life being black, but also being cops. What does that mean for them? What does it mean to be a black parent? And that kind of spiraled into this podcast during 2020, because again, we couldn't get together. And so I have this podcast called In Cop, Negro, Black and Blue. And I was doing that for a while. And at the same time I started, because I'm a dance maker, started going, okay, what if I made something in the studio as a result of this podcast? So we started working in the studio. I had me, another dancer, two dancers, a hip hop musician, and a jazz saxophone player, all working on this piece. And we did it for about 6 months. I just kind of put it to bed. I was like, okay, that's fine. You know, we made some stuff. We did a little showing, and I kind of put it on the shelf. And then June 27, 2022, Jalen Walker was killed about 10 minutes from my house by police. And this piece I had thought I just was gonna like put on the shelf, I suddenly realized like, oh, you know, as a dance maker, I think we're always like, how do I make something that the country hears about and it goes on tour? And I just suddenly decided I wanted to make a piece that was hyper local to Akron, and that's all that mattered. So I restarted the podcast, and I went from talking to people all over the country to just talking to people in Akron about what was going on in the city. And we went back into the studio and started making this piece, also called Aftermath, ironically. And the piece was about what does a black community do in the aftermath of police violence? How do we heal from this? So all of that, trying to figure out all of that amongst like, you know, protests happening down the street from my house, raising a child who's now born and tiny, and trying to figure out how to emotionally deal with all those things. We premiered this work at Bold Street Theater in the round, and out of 4 performances, we probably sold out 90% of the tickets, which was awesome. Also raised money for the first time, and like made it happen too. So it was also just because of how much it meant to my life and how much it was about my own personal journey of figuring out what I'm gonna say to my son, which I figured out through that process, but also making this piece of art that felt closest to who I was at the time. And then also from the administrative side, like actually learning how to raise money and raise enough money to pay everybody the way they really should have paid, not just what we could figure out. It just felt like, oh, this is my first crack at doing this. I can do this. I can figure this out. If I can do it under all this stress of 2020 and these protests and all this stuff, I can figure this out, because this is probably socially or personally for me, the hardest version of what this will look like.
Janet? Please introduce us to North Point Ballet by Artistic Highlight.
All right, will do. Hi everyone, I'm Janet Ziak, and like Christy, I want to start off by saying like insanely humbled to be in the presence of all of the former panel and also all of these wonderful people who now have to go and follow all of these beautiful presentations. I am from Northeast Ohio. I went to Mercyhurst University, got a dance degree, and then performed professionally as a dancer with the St. Louis Ballet. After retiring from that career, moved back home, got married, started a family, and noticed that my son was not developing typically. Obviously, like music and dance and going out was part of our lives. We would take him places he could not handle it, but he loved music, loved dancing. And I was freelancing for a community theater program, and I would bring him to rehearsals with me where the lights were on, the faces were familiar. You know, he could associate the colors with the character. Like, it was just this really wonderful, and that the moment of like, I get this because I'm a dancer. Like, I have the privilege of being the choreographer in the show. But everybody should get this. Like, there are other mothers out there who want to take their kids somewhere and can't. Like, they should have this opportunity too. So that was kind of the reason. And then kind of like Melissa, like, hey, I have a bunch of friends. You guys want to go do this thing with me? And here we are. And I think like a career highlight for sure was at the Dance USA conference a couple years ago, where I know a lot of us were there, and somebody who I had never seen, met, heard from before came up to me and was like, oh, you're the sensory friendly nutcracker. And I was like, yes, I am the sensory friendly. Thank you so much. And we're like, just, you know, and I, yeah, so that is.
People are picking
yes.
up what you're putting down. Yeah. Matthew, please introduce us to Fortress Dance Theater.
Hello, I'm Matt, and Fortress Dance Theater just started last year. My first project is probably the one I'm most pleased about, or we'll talk about. I had just moved back 2 years ago, started the company last year, and I reached out to my friend, Anna and Joseph Trumbo. They were trying to have a baby for years, and they were failing. And so they told me about their procedure they were going through, and medical professionals told them how it would be their last chance to have a child. And as they were telling me, I was just blown away by their faith. And I was like, I want to make this my first project with the company. I had another little side story that my own creativity created of a boy who was fishing on a boat and encounters love and death. And he encounters them 3 times in his life. And so I took that and I created dance about that. But then when death comes to take the man's life the 3rd time he sees them, I have love come in and then chase the man back through his lifetime until he's a boy. And then they walk out as a family together. And I was able to use Anna as a dancer because she was a dancer with Neos Dance Theater, and Joseph, who was an opera singer, and I had him create a lullaby for his would-be child if he had one. And he sang that on the walk back until they got that child. As Anna was going through procedure, she was telling me in rehearsal she might not be able to even do the dance, so I had an understudy. She was able to perform both shows, and I didn't really hear back from them the rest of that year until January, when Anna said they were pregnant. And it wasn't until that time that it really hit me, like, oh, I prayed for this miracle. I have written documents of my prayers written out for this family, and I don't know, I'm a faithful guy, and I've seen miracles happen, but it feels different when you step into the process of praying for one. Have you ever prayed for something that you haven't gotten? Have you ever prayed for something that the answer was silence to? I have several times. And when this panel started today, I got a text that Anna and Joe had their son today. It honestly blew me away. His name is Sam, and I don't know, it just came full circle today. And it just really set the bar for what I want my company to be. You know, I wanted to take prayers, take laments, take testimonies, and just put them out there, regardless if this prayer was answered or not. It's not the point. And so that was definitely my highlight for this company.
Thank you. How about a round of applause for all of us? And we're just getting started. But I have to reflect, like, hearing and digging in deeper to our community and so many other stories. I don't think this is a surprise to the artists in the room that art making is deeply personal. And I'm also sort of fascinated as we were talking about sort of like where are our audiences and how can we sort of like pull together the volume of people to get behind dance in Northeast Ohio. But it almost feels in some ways that some of these projects that you shared are so deeply intimate that they also aren't maybe meant for 1,000-seat theaters. So I just wanted to sort of flag that for us as we continue to think about the future of dance. Y'all did an amazing job on time, well rehearsed everyone. And so I'd love to hear from as many that would be willing to share. One of the things that we named is, in the last panel, 30, 40, 50 years ago, if people knew what they know now, they might not have started a company. and you are all of coming of an age as a dance maker and a generation, and whether it's because of the internet or otherwise, you know your previous choreographers and mentors and leaders probably have said, like, why do you want to start a dance company? And so I'm really curious also your decision to make a dance life in Northeast Ohio. So who would like to tell us a part of, like, why have you chosen to make a creative life in Northeast Ohio? Yeah, Megan, please.
So I got that exact conversation with a professor at Ohio University during my undergrad. First year, she's like, what do you want to do? And I'm like, I came to gain the knowledge to be able to start a dance company. She's like, why do you want to do that? It's horrible. And I was like, well, I've heard it's horrible, but I'm going to do it. So I think the biggest thing was knowing that we were going to be coming back to where I grew up in Northeast Ohio. And I think the idea of making and building community where you grew up and where you have an infrastructure and understand just the different climates of the diversity of Northeast Ohio. There's so many little pockets everywhere, and I felt that we also understood that it was an affordable place to live. And how do we, bring Northeast Ohio to a point in the dance field where there's an equitable and sustainable way of living as a working artist. And I think, I had a lot of friends who were choosing New York and LA and Chicago, and I think from that experience of witnessing that, and my sister's a little older than me as well, her and I both founded the company. I got to see and learn from her experiences of going out and training and dancing in New York and Connecticut, and it was a lot. It was a lot of struggle, a lot of pushback to just do what we do as dancers and creators. And I think, we felt strongly, her and I, that like we wanted to try to change that narrative for artists. And we also knew the vibrancy of, we grew up, going to Arts in August as kids and seeing Ohio Ballet and all the different companies. Rebecca danced with a bunch of the companies for Urban Inlet. And, so those, that component of knowing like, it's here. And I think artists need to know that like they can also like raise a family, they can have work-life balance, they can be a part of something that is striving for the getting rid of the struggle of being a working artist. And believe me, we're struggling, we're living it, that it's hard. Like it's not, we're not done. Like it's something that we face every day. The pandemic, I think, really highlighted that for our organization. We were
so fortunate to get through that financially as an organization. But I think, you know, from the very onset, we thought we have to come from a place of community. And I think the idea of we don't succeed as an organization if the others around us don't succeed as well. So like every choice we make as an organization is based on, does it raise, you know, the boats of everybody around us? Are we creating opportunities for others to survive? Are we building into that sustainable ecosystem? And I think that has been our drive and continues to be our drive. And we just knew like Northeast Ohio had those elements to create that success.
It had proof of concept.
Yeah, exactly.
Sure, well put.
Thanks.
Other ideas, why Northeast Ohio? Christina?
I mean, the shortest answer I can provide is just the people. Like, we're all here and you're all here. Like, if I want to make something, I just have to pick up the phone. There's so many people that love this art form and love the arts in general. I want to be part of it, so it's like, it's easy. We have kind of a little, it's not easy.
It's easy to get to a yes.
To get to a yes. And it's easy to find the people that will pick up what you're putting down and want to be involved with you. Enough people here are willing to be vulnerable with you and are willing to go all in on something, even if it may or may not work. And that's awesome.
Dom, I'm gonna take the privilege of knowing you're on a kind of multi-state journey with your current work. Why Northeast Ohio, especially considering that you're traveling to so many other places as well?
Well, I think the first and real answer is like, I got 2 toddlers, and my family lives nearby, and my sister's back there, and she helps raise them too. And I'm running around, and I think some of that is Christina's saying, right? Like, so in this moment, I'm gonna make a distinction. Like, I know we're talking a lot about Northeast Ohio dance, but I'm an Akron boy specifically. And in Akron, I can pick up the phone, I can text, I can email just about any funder around here, and they'll answer the email, the phone call, whatever. I can have a meeting with anybody, right? I can, the amount of times I went to Rob and say, hey Rob, I have this crazy idea. And I just say it to him. And he goes, well, think about this and this and this and that and that. And I go back and I, you know, relook at that idea and come back and say, what do you think about this? And people are willing to be partners in a way in Akron specifically that I think is really, really rare. It doesn't take a lot to get a hold of anybody. And so for me, yeah, the other part is there's something about legacy when it comes to dance here, right? Like I look at this, and I'm so impressed by this timeline, you know? The panels up here earlier, I was thinking about, David, you talking about the icebox. So me and Matt went to middle school together at Lower South. And I told him, I was like, the icebox is my first remembering of modern dance in my life. Okay. And it's like, so that happened. They decided to do this series that they didn't have to do. Because of that series, I was at Lower South, and we took modern dance class, but you're like in 4th grade, you don't know what you're doing. You're just like, yeah, I gotta take my shoes and socks, it's weird. And then you see people do this stuff, and you're like, that looks cool though. And that like gets somewhere in your brain. So you have all these experiences over time, right? Like Dance Cleveland brings Garth Fagan down to Firestone High School where I go. I have this experience. Garth Fagan invites me to a summer camp one time, and I have this experience. And then I come home. So it's like every experience I've had in the dance world has been because somebody who lives here has provided it for me, either directly or indirectly, which has built this foundation of dance, right? Like I danced with Inlet for 10 years, right? That's where I literally like learned how to choreograph in that way. So it's like no one flew in from New York to give me that experience, you know what I mean? No one flew anywhere, like people made things happen, people spent money and all these things to have influences on young people who are growing up in the city. And I was like, so I want to keep myself here and build something, and who knows, right? There might be some 4th grader who might have seen something, right? Who 25 years from now, they're gonna be sitting right here saying this same thing, right? And I think there's something important about like that legacy. And that's just where my brain is like right now.
Love it. There's something, and I don't think it's solely limited to Akron, but as a microcosm, it illustrates this. The accessibility to some of the institutions and infrastructure is just greater than it is in some other places. And one of the upsides that this was most visible to me during the pandemic was like how much more quickly any of the CARES relief resources got to our arts and culture institutions in a way that I know our colleagues in New York and LA did not get the kind of support that the Ohio Arts Council was like, hey,
Yep.
that the Akron Cultural Plan work that Nicole Mullen had set up to then translate into Summit County CARES relief, that it just was less dense. And so easier to get to the yes, doesn't mean there's less work, but you know, it just cuts some of the sort of like denseness of the volume when you're like, I can't get heard or seen. Talise, you talked about the importance of place with your artistic highlight. So can you share why you continue to nurture Japo here in Cleveland and Northeast Ohio?
Most definitely. I mean, just to kind of go on what Dominic was saying is my children, they're here. You know, I grew up in this town as well as in New York City as well. But I can make those phone calls to a lot of people. I have Bill here as well, who was my high school dance teacher, who I can always call for mentorship. So that's one thing. But it's about community. The same individuals who I grew up dancing with, now I'm teaching their children. And their children have babies, and I'm teaching their children. So it's this lineage and this legacy that's built that just makes me proud when I'm standing now in the wings, and for me to be able to see my niece, my son, you know, who's also a musician within the company, and growing up within a community. That was something that was really important for me growing up, and I think some of it has gotten lost, you know, along the way. So it's important for me to keep that continuation of community and keep trying to rebuild it. And it's not easy, you know what I mean? Some people come through, you know, it's like a snake. They come through, they leave, they come back. But the community is still ever present. And I think it's really important to build community here, you know, in Northeast Ohio. But we also have community in so many other different places as well. But Cleveland is home. Yeah.
Anyone else want to talk about why Northeast Ohio? Group consensus. I appreciate that trust. It's interesting. I'm gonna try out a hypothesis. Yeah, the NCCAkron team knows. I'm like, I'm gonna speak in draft. This idea, what I heard a lot in the first panel was some of the coming and going, was some of the ideas, because we also have to remember how young for the nonprofit sector is, the, you know, codified dance companies are as well. The NEA was only established along with the Ohio Arts Council in the 60s. So this is not, you know, as old as like capitalism. Just monolithically, we're still making it up as we go. And it also sounds, I'm thinking about what Ms. McIntyre shared too. It's like, oh, people said, great, you want to start a company, and this is where you go to get a 501c3, and this is where you go to get a lawyer, and how you set it up. That then also supported this idea of, okay, great, so you must want to tour. You must want to perform it in front of as many people as possible. Like, if that is some of the benchmarks of the 20th century dance ecosystem, I might offer a hypothesis for the 21st century dance ecosystem that now, maybe because we're connected through the internet, but there is there's a different sort of driving force around success or satisfaction. Is it work-life balance? Because you know how hard it is and you don't want to miss out on having a family, and making more space. Like, you're seeing different things. So I would love to hear from as many as would want to share, what is your definition of success or satisfaction? The why you do this work and what you're seeking for. Could be your mission statement, could be something a little more personal, but yeah, what's your definition of success? And I'm looking at our PhD candidate, Catherine. I'm going to volunteer you to go first, please.
So I think I come across a lot of people in this profession, in this field, that the consumption of, it's never enough. Someone said something earlier about, once you get to that threshold, you set the bar again, right? So for me, satisfaction or success is fleeting. I'll have it for a moment. I have a commission coming up for the University of North Carolina School of the Arts. And in that moment, I was like, that's, the dancers there are amazing, to be able to set work on them. And then it's gone, right? Just like the earlier panel, knowing you've made an impact in someone's life, knowing that art has either allowed an audience member to feel something or to feel differently or to see something differently, that impact, both through teaching and through presenting work, is why I do what I do, is what sustains me, is the breath. And it's why I can't walk away when people are going, you could go make money doing this, and I, and I say, why can't I just make money doing what I love? And why is it devalued? Because I love it. I work just as hard, right? And so, and even in academia, where dance is here, right, at the starting salary, right? If I was in mathematics or science, I'd be way up here. And I know for a fact I put just as much, if not more, into my education, because it's always ongoing for dancers. We don't get the 4 years, right? We're constantly taking class, we're constantly taking this workshop, we're doing, So, so satisfaction, I think, is just knowing that you've had some sort of impact. But I don't think it's anything that I'm ever really going to attain.
Yeah. Also speaking to the ephemerality of dance,
Right.
or a visual art form or medium that, whether it happens for 3 shows in one weekend and never again, or you tour it year after year, if you weren't there, do you really have it or hold it? Alice, thanks. I was gonna tell on you next.
So
Did you feel that
perfect. I must have felt it. For me, so I talked a little bit when I introduced myself about that idea of transmission. The other thing that for me it really represents success is a depth, and I think a deeper understanding of whatever our artistic practice is comes in those moments of like discovery and aha, that I'm not just repeating the same thing over and over again, but I'm taking the movement apart, discovering new things. I've been working a lot with Felice Bagley, who's a modern dancer from sort of a previous generation. And we constantly have these like aha moments as we take apart these flamenco steps together and find new ways of creating movement. And then depth as well for me. I had sort of really had my eye on being in academia. I very much had the scholarly side and the performance and the teaching side. And I've sort of had that door closed in my face over and over and over again. And God was like, no, this isn't for you, stop it. And I'm so glad that happened, because I think that for me, at least in my way of working, that I get much more depth out of being in the community and working with people beyond 4 years, is what sort of is limited to in college, and not that there isn't depth in that, but it's just different, and I think my process works better more in the community, and so I had to sort of let go of this idea of success that had me on this academic trajectory and realize that there were all these other pathways that I was actually more suited to, and there was still a scholarly side to what I'm doing.
The shifting definition of success and listening to what you want to let go of. I'm thinking of Maggie's story about like, when do you want to grow up, and it's like, what if we never grow up and continue to do what we love? And that's not in an infantilizing way, but this idea also that we stay curious instead of striving towards a fixed idea. Megan's making eyes at me. You talked about all boats rising, but are there any other definitions of success on the TMP between you or Elise?
Yeah, I mean, I think for us, we really feel the success when it's that we can create that platform for others. It's like, we always say, like, we live by that motto of like leaders eat last, of like we try to put others before us. And Good
Okay. I know.
I lost my daughter in 2019. And it was hard to come back from that. You know, I'm definitely not back from that, but you know, I was like, oh, this community to actually like run an organization. Like, how do you do that?
Right.
It's like people like this, that's how you do it. So it's like, you know, coming together and seeing that we can accomplish something out of like the hardest things that we're living with. And how do we just like kind of find a way to move forward through that? And like, we see a lot at CDF, our Cleveland Dance Fest, our big festival we do every year. We're going into our 9th one this fall, and like last year specifically, like I'm not at a point where I creatively can output, you know, this story. But we had somebody who submitted from Columbus, who she had 3 miscarriages, and her and her husband created a collaborative work, where she choreographed and he composed the music. And, you know, as soon as we saw the application, I mean, we're all whole panels, you know, crying from it. And obviously I have a very deep personal connection to that. But seeing that come to the stage and seeing the audience respond and people feeling heard, like that's why we do it. And, you know, the last few years, that's what's gotten us through it. You know, we're all facing so many things. And on my personal side, like, that's the only thing that gets me through it, is knowing that the team around us and the community in which we're serving is why we do it. So,
Yeah. Thank you for sharing. Yes, please.
yes, mine is this overarching idea that diasporic dance forms is seen and recognized just as Western dance forms, that it has a respectability associated with it. When works are created, that it is adjudicated, it's looked at as being on par. It's just recent that West African and diasporic dance forms are now being included in academia. In the past, it was something that it was just an elective. You can take that if you want to. But for us as a whole to see the importance of these dance forms and how it relates to our own dance forms and how they intersect, and looking at the origins and knowing how to research within these dance forms and know how it's important for our society, and that it should not be an elective. It should be something that's automatically included, you know, in every dance program. I always say you don't have a dance program if you don't have diasporic dance forms. You have a little bit of program. So my ideas of success is to see that elevated and to seeing these forms on par and just as important.
Yes. I'm a recovering marketer, so I can't stop thinking about the audience. And I mean, you know, my personal why to doing this work is because whether as a mover and as an audience member and a curator, I have witnessed firsthand and believe in the power and trust in artists to help us process the world that we live in, right? So much of the personal and the why, and I don't know, how do we convey that to our audiences, that it isn't just, this is my show, it'll be the coolest thing you ever see, right? The bombasticness of marketing speak, but rather to be like, this is, you know, a practice of engaging with the emotions and what it is to be human. It's one of the reasons that I am extra grateful, extra shout out to the Cummings Center for the History of Psychology, and because really I encourage you to read the language that they use to talk about what it means to be human. And I was like, I have read this in all of our grant proposals. And yet they're putting it on the side of the building. So there's gotta be something in there. Gonna wrap up the formal panel piece of it and then invite some breakout discussions. A breakout discussion is what we have time for. But we're doing great on time. Of course, dancers have great timing. So we're going to go through similar, more numeric yes/no questions. And also, as I advised the first panel too, like pass or I don't know is absolutely, I can't recall. This isn't a Senate hearing. So all are welcome answers. If you're like, that's a little too deep, that's fine. But we will go down the line and see if we can build a little momentum. The wave is optional. I'm curious, we'll start first. What is your current budget? Most recent, it could be your most recent project, or if you have an operating organizational budget. And please tell us if it is a project or operating, because just because you're project-based doesn't mean your budget is necessarily smaller or larger. So just a little more context of your operating environments.
So we're kind of more project-based, but we have a like annual budget and it's usually around 40 to 50 grand.
Excellent. North Point.
North Point Ballet's 2024 operating budget is around $300,000.
Great.
To date, the largest project budget I've had was around $25K, but in general, it's whatever money I have left over to put into what I'm gonna make. Yeah.
My latest project budget for a piece called The River Balloons is $250,000.
Fortunately, it is project-based and mostly from my salary, so there's not much of a budget there.
Our budget's about 200,000.
Agile Dance is project-based, so each project ranges from a couple $100 to $20,000, and that comes basically from my husband and I happen to be connected with someone who has a wonderful employee match through our fiscal sponsor.
Understanding the systems.
Yes.
Mojuba.
Yeah, we started off project-based and are just now pivoting into more operational funding. We're about 180,000. Started basically with, like you guys said, gig to gig, project to project. So yeah, we're appreciative for new opportunities.
TMP.
Yeah, we started project-based in 2009, and then in 2015, we received our nonprofit status. Our operational budget is a little over 100 grand. Pre-pandemic 2019, it was at 100 grand, so we finally have made it back into that sector and are ready to get going from there, so, yeah.
Catherine Meredith and Artists is project-based, and usually it just comes out of whatever commission. But I will say, from the time it started, when I was getting my MFA in 2011, that I made it my mission to pay dancers for rehearsals as well as performance. Like I said, I've worked too many years, like for free in New York, hustling, and I just refused to allow that.
Similar to the company model, or just understanding the clarity that you're like, oh yeah, we have dancers on payroll, except for this, 6 weeks out of the year where they go on unemployment. The reality that dance is an art form that requires rehearsal.
Right.
I mean, we've talked about this with musicians who might say, well, I have to rehearse on my own and then I show up and I gig. But that it is, I definitely did dance projects where if I amortized out the rehearsal time against what I was actually paid, plus gas, I was in the negative.
Right.
Yeah, for sure.
I mean, just really quickly, like, apart from all the emotional, like, ephemeral aspects of success that we're talking about, I mean, just being part of the, like, next generation of people, one of the things that I would define as being successful would just be being part of that change, too. Like, wage transparency. Let's pay our dancers first, like, before anything, because we've all been in that situation, and it's like, we can be part of the change of pushing out less than favorable practices for the artists, for sure.
And talking, can I just say, like, because when I bring choreographers in for the Kent Dance Ensemble, we have these discussions, and this newer generation of choreographers that are up, they're very transparent about it, and especially the women, I will say, because we are not it's really not taught to us at a young age to talk about money, to, really advocate for ourselves. And so I think those conversations really need to be had more frequently. And so that we do understand, wait, how much are you getting for a commission? Wait, what's the going rate? Because there is no set Bible in our field, right? And so some people want to pay you by the length of the piece, if it's a full length versus, 5-minute work. And then we go, well, how much research are you putting in? So it really, there's no set standard. And that has done a disservice to our field and us within it.
Yeah.
So,
Thank you.
yeah.
Yes. It's, and I don't think that it's just limited to dance. I think the labor force coming out of the pandemic that's like, I can't believe what I used to put up with, or what is this, and making choices and turning, over transitioning faster, too. And that we need to take those same skills and to advocate for ourselves into the environment earlier. And that's not something to be shameful about. Yeah.
Can I add?
Please,
I want to
Melissa.
add also though, as working as a freelance performer with many other independent artists, I'm not certain that it's completely up to the choreographer or the artist to be able to pay those dancers. Being on both ends of that, I've done many projects for free, gladly, because I really believed in the work and the artist who I was working with. I personally, it's important to me, I pay the dancers for rehearsals and performance, and I work really hard to do that. But as a performing artist, I think there's also a responsibility within the entire system that we haven't figured out. That in order to continue this and cultivate this community of artists coming up and giving them the opportunity to make their work and to just keep this legacy going, we need to figure out some way that particular artist isn't responsible for paying these people to create that work. It's not just like, well, I need to go buy paint and put it on a canvas and then it's there. It's people's bodies and time and energies. And I don't know the solution, and I don't like to bring it up without having an idea of a solution, but
No, thanks for
but I
bringing it
think
up.
it's important that it shouldn't just be up to one individual.
And not at the martyrdom of the leading individual. Just that you're making the project doesn't mean that means I need to pay everyone else, but then you're not paying yourself, right? Because that's another sort of not so, dirty, not so secret that how many choreographers haven't quantified their own time, but you also can't do this work without those other people and their bodies and their commitment. I'll add, in the spirit of our living environmental analysis, it also might come up a time, and there are some funding type entities in the room, and I was like, but I think there's a real question for the philanthropic sector about keeping up with inflation, about understanding the real cost of things. I shared the innovation grant that Anna Halpern had applied for before. P.S. She did not end up getting funded, but that was over 15 years ago, and it still is just a $9,000 grant. And I was like, yeah, we're not there, but yes.
Breakout.
Going down the line, I'll start with you again, Alice. Yes or no, do you have a physical space that you're managing? Because this is another cost. You're like, do I pay for people? Do I pay the rent?
No, we do not.
Okay. Janet, does North Point Ballet have a space?
We have our own office space, which is conveniently down the hall from Baldwin Wallace University's Community Arts School studios. So we pay rent to the Community Arts School for daytime hours, and then they're able to use that space for, the evening and weekend classes. So it's a great partnership that I value very much.
Cool. Thank you for that transparency
Yes.
too. It's not just like, I found the money, I got the space. Like, there's some reciprocity. Christina, do you have a space?
Nope, I rent from Bill and from Maggie most often.
Excellent. Dominic?
No space.
Yes, Inlet Dance Theater.
Excellent. Do you want to tell us any more about how that partnership works for Japo and Inlet, or?
Oh, we would be here all day.
Okay.
But it's a wonderful relationship. It's kind of like full circle. He was my high school teacher. He had a space. I needed a space. And everything that we own is at Inlet Dance Theater. All of our rehearsals are there. It's a really great partnership. And it's wonderful to have a personal relationship with the individual going into the partnership, which makes it a lot easier. So it's been really wonderful for us.
Melissa, you found your own space out in the sites.
Yeah, I didn't have a space, and that's why I went out there into all the spaces. But currently renting, we work out of several different spaces. One, I barter, I teach at the studio in exchange for rehearsal space. Another space, I host other community artists to come into the space to help administrative costs of that. And yeah, renting and just wherever I can find it.
Mojuba?
Yes, we have our space. Very grateful this last year to have a space of our own, but similarly, we are open to other artists, so we do have a group with us who does major at historical Black college dancing, if you will. And we do have space available, so if anybody.
Where are you?
We're in Bedford Heights, Ohio at the moment. And so a beautiful space that used to be the house and home of the Cleveland Ballet. So we were very fortunate just to open the door and the dance space was ready. So yeah, we're excited to continue on there.
Cool. TMP?
We do. We started out in a lot of places, but then we made our way over to Pilgrim Church in Tremont. We were there for a while. We were renting kind of certain hours of the week because we couldn't quite afford to have a full week of renting in our own space. And then in 2021, we lost that space. Prices were going up, and we had to pivot. And we found a great space in Fairview Park. And that's where we are now. We have a studio, an office, storage, restroom, our own ability to heat and cool it and keep it clean. So it's wonderful to have, and it's as well an open space for artists too. So we have bookings, and we have a lot of people that come and utilize the space for their own needs as well. So.
One of the perks of being a professor is you have access to studios. And when I need to rehearse downtown, Mary Ray Fletcher has been very generous to allow me, with my history with the company, to use that space as well, running free. So.
All right, a big round of applause for our
Possible
I think
is probably
Diane McIntyre did it.
the
nail on
lack of like a sustainable, equitable system that we can, as artists, whether we're a larger company, a smaller company, or individual artists, how like that we can draw from, like, that we can be a part of, that we can sustain our practices. Because we all know dance, it's we all go about it in a very different way. There is no like successful that tell you how to do it. And so I think that's been the thing that's been gatekeeping a lot of
everybody's concerts and
Also in terms of like services
and being able to pay artists in a way that makes it possible to keep going and not just go project to
there's a
project.
lot of people,
When I had Cleveland Ballet's
the month friends
budget,
that are
and I was
starting to
mentally calculating what everybody was saying, we're not
good,
even
not have solid dance there.
So what happened to all of that money?
So
Because it just
when
seemed to
they're out
just disappear into the woodwork.
And in Ohio, I think you find that what is the balance of individual giving? Most of that money is individual money, you think, or is that audience?
We also have to find a way to be more supportive.
Well, I know about 70% of our income is contributed. And that's pretty standard around the country. So that's individuals, corporations, it's the usual stuff. But what ultimately made those two companies, and when I look around Ohio, Ballet Met, Cincinnati Ballet, 32 million a year or something now. It's individual giving. It's tapping into people who may not know they have a passion for dance, but giving them that passion and attracting their support. Because our system here is just so broken, and I know that David has spoken about that a great deal. The system here makes it almost untenable to survive long-term in a substantive way. You know, everybody can do project-based, I'm not getting paid, but I have an idea, but that's not the way it should be. And what's really bothersome is, you know, you go to places where I mean, everywhere, I mean, even Hong Kong, I worked there. All the arts organizations, 80% of their budget was paid by the government. 80%. So you didn't even have to blink. And the other thing is infrastructure. Everybody's busy looking for theaters. Everybody's trying to find studios. And, you know, we recently lost the Green Theater, which is where most of us were doing most of our performing. And it's really becoming difficult because if you want to be in a real theater, you're dealing with a union situation, exorbitantly expensive. And so, you know, it just becomes such a slog. It's the same battles every day, over and over and over again. And, you know, it's like, why can't we create a dance community that supports itself? Why don't we support each other more? Not that we have money to bring, but if we supported each other, we would have a voice. Right now, dance, you look like Kathy said, universities, it's low man on the totem pole. You look at the funders, it's low man on the totem pole. But part of it is that we don't have a big enough voice. We've never united as a voice. And if we did, then people would have to listen to us. If we all descended on a, you know, foundation A, B, C, and D, they would go, oh, I had no idea there were so many of you. And none of you were able to find this, you know. We're not telling our stories to the people who can help us.
I would say this, when you said that in the panel earlier, that's the thing that's been on my mind. Again, Lakeisha, my sister, so we talk about this all the time at my mom's house, about how there's not a singular powerful voice. And it reminds me of Akron. Back in 2013, did a case study about arts and culture in the city. And one of the things they found out from other sectors, the business sector, the big thing was arts and culture doesn't function as a sector, that's why we don't trust them. And so as a result of this study, Arts Now, which is in Akron, has built a backbone organization for arts and culture. If you look at 2015, from where Arts Collaboration started to now, there's an Akron cultural plan, which is basically a strategic plan for the arts. Right, there's all of this movement that's happening here because of just one organization, it's a backbone organization. So I've always wondered, like, what would it look like for Dance in Northeast Ohio to have a backbone organization that did all the advocating on behalf of artists?
And when Cleveland Valley and Ohio Valley folded, Dance USA came because it turned out there were 13 smaller dance companies that nobody knew about because the two companies were so big, their voices were obliterated. And Dance USA was so surprised, they considered opening, just like they had Dance USA NYC, they considered doing a Dance USA Northeast Ohio, Dance USA NEO. And it didn't come to pass, and when I think back on the number of companies that were sitting there in that meeting, so many are not here anymore. But, you know, and who has time to take advantage of those companies? That's the other part. You know, we don't have enough support. Yeah.
Well, I was just thinking about how the financial resource thing is probably the biggest nut to crack. And part of the problem with, you know, we're all trying to get as many people involved as we can. Like, I literally have 7 days a week there's dance happening in my studio. Not mine, other folk, you know what I mean? So I'm doing what I can. But when all of these different organizations, you know, because we would qualify as an organization and not like an individual artist, we're so busy in survival mode that the bandwidth to include a Dance USA Northeast Ohio is like,
makes you want to cry.
I do have to sleep, you know? I'm not getting enough sleep already. And I think that's it's this weird catch-22, because we all sort of have this sense of this is what's needed, and none of us have the time to make that happen.
This is one of the reasons we started community initiative in the spring. Comes together, and our hopes is to try to like not just have the major companies that start to pull up the rest of the companies within the whole system, and then hopefully we get conversations like, okay, we're prioritizing this one time we can pull out of our survival mode to come together, and hopefully we can start to kind of build from that. Because I think I agree, it's like 15 years of survival. That's what we've been doing, and it hasn't changed. And you know, there are better times than others, and that's I think the kicker is that you can't take your foot off the gas. You're just like constantly trying to.
When I think a lot of us, to your point, it's not our own survival, it's the fact that we have so many requests of our time to intersect with the community, because the community wants stuff. And we have to just kind of figure out how to, like, the survival mode is, how do I say yes to that school and that one over there and do that tour and all these people that want what we're producing, and yet also pay general operating. And then what about all these independent people that are in and out of my space, and are they okay? And it's just a lot. Yeah.
I mean, a little bit of good news is we just got the large Arts Next grant, and we're going to be using the funds to permanently take our large studio and create a black box theater. And so it'll be, the plan hasn't been designed yet, is that everything will be hung in such a way that within 10 or 15 minutes you can convert it into a theater. It'll seat 80 people. More if it's in the summer and we open up our garage doors and people sit outside. But my hope is, the need here, I mean, is enormous, so if we had a theater that it would only take a few minutes to convert, then smaller groups can come in much more affordably, and you don't have to worry about selling 500 tickets, because of the size of the theater, and that it can be used really as a home or a place for smaller groups to do their work and to, have time and money to do creative or experimental work as well.
20 different types of classes on a single day.
What I'm taking away from today is that
they
like
can
this
get a
gathering
dance class, they
will
can get a hardcore ballet, they can get a
legacy
Zumba, they
panel,
can
coming up panel.
improv.
We're not paid for this.
All these kinds of.
This was a love gift, right? And then audiences here in the same manner. So keeping the momentum is just gonna happen ever again.
And those hubs also.
Or are we gonna maintain our silos?
Community programs.
And that's how it's been striving.
So that people from the community focus.
That is a reality that, I mean, not being pessimistic, but I feel like that's what will happen. And we will continue to be survivors, and we will continue to have to try to scrounge and find ways just to show our creative work, which is another thing when you look at grant writing that you have to do. It has to be something, it can't just be about the work that you're doing. It has to be something please. So it's just a whole shift.
Finish your last thought for now. And we've invited our other groups to come in.
Diane here. I feel like very lucky that I got her group. You
had a ringer.
But basically we were talking about, she had mentioned how she was impressed with how much is going on in Northeast Ohio that she didn't even know about, and so that sort of led to how do we make the general public aware and get that excited about it, and she had this idea, well, maybe there should be an umbrella organization that's promoting all of us. But even just, why couldn't just for example, like Dance Cleveland could promote and just share some of the local things that are happening because they have more of that general audience. I'm just saying, you know, but somehow that we build, and rather than just these lists online that you get from Ohio Dance, but the actual build the like word of mouth, cultural, social momentum around dance, so that it's not just other dancers excited about other dancers.
We have a communication issue.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, that, an umbrella, where we create a kind of umbrella that promotes everything, and even stories of the dancers and their expression.
Yeah, it's not just the dance, because,
No.
yeah, that's not as compelling.
Yeah, that's what we were talking about.
Nice.
We were
Group-
gonna get on.
Yeah, no, I want to make sure we get to hear from
Yes.
everyone. Group 2, anyone want to share?
I think we're scattered around. David.
David has made a decision that says no.
This is your gig.
No call, boy.
And that's the challenge.
That is.
No,
Yeah.
we didn't get to anything conclusive because it's sort of like, you know, I did ask the question like in sort of hearing about all these different artists' work and the different ways they're finding and navigating their way and making it work. But like it still begs the question for me is, are we as artists being continually sort of forced to build into existing structures systemic things that really ultimately, to what extent are they sustainable? I mean, the idea of equanimity and pay and this sort of thing, I mean, it's sort of, you know, it's still dependent on a system of patronage and philanthropy, and so like, how do we see ourselves moving throughout our careers? Do we see our careers in the same way? You know, is it a company or a facsimile of a company or a part? It's still the same kind of model. And so that's all. We just sort of kind of like we're turning this over with no solutions, right?
Yeah.
But knowing that systemically there is something that has to shift in a way. Philanthropy doesn't have an answer. It's and you know, I don't know. I think my theory of of Groundworks was very much that there's some kind of a support system that's still not in place, right? Like we did everything we could to sustain the organization at a very high level, and we couldn't move beyond a certain. It was a ceiling, I felt, and because, and I didn't feel it's not on the philanthropic community because I think they were doing as much as they could, given all the other demands of the rest of the world. So I think as far as the arts are concerned, there has to be some kind of a different support leg to the equation that is not there right now. It's some combination of things. I do think it's more private sector. I think it's definitely incumbent on corporations and development entities who profit from the arts and the arts ecosystem and what the arts means to communities and what it means to people's quality of life, which they showcase all the time, but they do not support in any sort of consistent way beyond the huge institutional kinds of things that they do.
Well, and maybe Northeast Ohio can be a fertile ground for a new model of what that unknowing thing might be. I am gonna move through our groups just out of respect for time, and it's been a full afternoon. 3?
I'm gonna add on to what Diane said, that we need a dance hub, and it's not just a place that tells us what's happening, but it's a place where dancers can go to get classes, where they can get mentorship, where new artists who are coming up can be mentored, where there's a performance space that is dance specific and dance friendly. And also, one of the things that was mentioned is that what's happening in dance is kind of a microcosm of the cultural shift that's happening in relationships and the ways that people are connecting and the way they're connecting with things other than themselves or outside of themselves.
The educator took notes. Thank you.
Yep.
Group 4.
Yeah, I think that our biggest takeaway was that as a community, we don't have a singular voice. And so we're all going through the same things, but we have no voice that helps us tell our stories or do those things to things like the philanthropic community, the corporate community. And one of the things I brought up was Arts Now, and the study Arts Now did in Akron 2013 in the arts and culture sector, and found out from these various places like the business sector that the business sector didn't trust the arts because we didn't act as a sector. So as a result, an organization like Arts Now, which is a backbone organization for arts and culture, was created. If you look at when Arts Now was created to now, arts and culture has exploded in Akron to some degree. And so one of the things that came up is what would happen if, excuse me, if Northeast Ohio Dance had its own Arts Now. And then the other part of that is,
An umbrella organization.
right.
Yeah.
The other part is, but everyone's tired, so how do we even make that happen?
Yeah, thank you. And then last but not least, group 5, anything to add or second what's been said?
I think Mason brought up a really good point, and it's something that we talked about, like in our own organization. And I think it's communication, but it's not just about the communication companies or individual artists, but also those who are setting the presenting schedules. Because raise your hand if you perform this weekend.
Yeah. We can only see so many shows in the weekend.
Exactly, and it was like, Megan and I, we were like, we gotta run over to Forest Lodge because we gotta see Kate and everybody at OCB, like, because we want to be there for each other. But you cannot be in 2 places or 5 places at the same time. So I think it's a matter of like figuring out if who is setting these schedules and how can we better communicate like overall so that we can show that there is unification, that there is like trust between all of us, and that we are choosing to engage with each other as we're making and presenting and performing. Because I want to know like, okay, what is Bill presenting this year, or you know, all this stuff. So that's what I'd like to do.
Give yourselves a round of applause. So much for sticking in on this journey and communicating to. I'm gonna wrap it up at a time. Sorry. Just
what are we gonna do with all these ideas?
That it is incumbent upon us. Okay. What are we gonna do with all these ideas? I want to, I don't think we have to have the plan and strategy today, but I appreciate naming, like, we were here, we witnessed this, let's not be having the same conversation a year from now or 20 years from now. Formally, in the role of housekeeping, want to acknowledge the Akron Community Foundation, the GAR Foundation, the Ohio Arts Council, PEGS Foundation, particularly for supporting all of Groundwork's activities here in Akron. Also want to invite all of us. Maybe we can't come up with the umbrella organization tomorrow, but we can make sure that we continue to show up for each other, that we see each other more often, and we do have an opportunity to witness history with Groundwork's final performances next weekend in Akron, August 2nd and 3rd, and then the following weekend at Kane Park on August 10th, and that information is also available on our way out the door. Lastly, a big extra thank you to Joan and David for having this vision. The conversation has been many months in the making,